A few years ago, Netflix released a movie about everyone's favorite restaurant. It's a restaurant that everyone goes to, but nobody talks about. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about McDonald's. Yes, McDonald's. And you might be sitting there listening, Ricky, I don't know about that. McDonald's, who goes to McDonald's? I can't even tell you the last time I went to McDonald's. And I say, yeah, whatever. McDonald's sells 2.5 billion hamburgers every single year. So literally all over the world, everyone is eating McDonald's. And I'm not here to debate whether or not you should eat McDonald's, whether or not you go to McDonald's or not, whatever. I'm here to talk about this movie, okay? It was a movie called The Founder that released and debuted back in 2016. And this movie was specific about this origin story of McDonald's and kind of really about the perspective of Ray Kroc, kind of the visionary who pioneered the whole McDonald's concept, at least the way that we know it and understand it today. I mean, it's really, if you haven't watched it, it's really an interesting movie, and honestly, it's incredibly accurate. I would definitely recommend watching it, although I'm going to be telling you a whole bunch about the plot and kind of what happened. So anyway, back in the, I think it was like 1940s or whatever, this guy, Ray Kroc, he was a salesman, and so he would travel and all around the country. He's from Chicago, lived in the Midwest, and would travel all across the country as a salesperson. Well, he stumbled upon a restaurant in San Bernardino, California called McDonald's. It was founded and operated by two brothers, and McDonald was their last name. And so it was a hamburger joint, milkshakes, all this, and it was great. It was busy, it was popping. And when he came across this restaurant, Ray Kroc automatically or immediately had this vision of seeing this restaurant like replicated and duplicated all across the country, particularly in the Midwest where he was from. So he approached the brothers about franchising and seeing if they would be willing to expand their business or expand their restaurant into multiple restaurants. And the brothers were kind of hesitant and resistant, honestly, because they tried franchising in the past, but it didn't work out properly. And so they were just kind of unwilling to go down that road. Well, Kroc was unwilling to take no for an answer. And so he just was super persistent and adamant about this and kind of wearing down on the brothers. And eventually they kind of got to this place where like, they weren't fully trusting of Ray Kroc, but they felt like, okay, well, maybe we'll give it a shot. So they decided they would go into agreement with him, into business with him, but they would kind of write a contract that was incredibly narrow and controlling, really to kind of make sure that they could control their business, they could control the finances, they would keep most of the revenue. But Ray Kroc like jumped at the opportunity to start this. So after he got the signed agreement, decides to go back to the Midwest and begin finding people who would want to like partner or get involved in this McDonald's franchising business. So he started to have some success, or the restaurants, I should say, started to have some success, where he had several locations opened across Chicago, across the Midwest part of the United States, but he personally wasn't experiencing success. In fact, he was hemorrhaging. He was bleeding money. Decided he needed to mortgage his house to kind of stay afloat. It was putting tension and strain on his marriage. Ended up divorcing his first wife due to the financial distress that they were experiencing in this business, and it was creating a lot of turmoil. And no matter what he did, he just wasn't profiting from this because the way the original contract worked out, there was no room for him to process or to profit. But then he had a friend or an advisor approach him and say, well, you should get into real estate. And specifically what you should do is purchase real estate and then lease that property back to the McDonald's Corporation. And that's exactly what Ray Kroc did. So he started purchasing properties and then leasing that land to the restaurants themselves. Eventually, he started to kind of amass this like empire where he had a lot of wealth based off of this land, off of all of his land holdings. And he was able to buy his way out of the contract, but not only buy his way out of his contract with the McDonald's brothers, he was actually able to buy them out of the business entirely. Like that's how profitable his real estate endeavor became. And so he kind of negotiated an agreement with them to buy out their share of the business. And as part of this kind of agreement, he told them, listen, I get to keep the McDonald's name. And so you'll have to keep your original restaurant, but you'll have to change its name. And then out of that, like you'll get residuals or like kind of perpetuity based off of like the licensing of your name. And it was just kind of like this handshake deal. So the brothers agreed to it. Ray Kroc didn't write in any form of like formal contract offer or anything like that. And wouldn't you know it, that like they made this good faith deal. Ray Kroc builds this McDonald's empire and they never once, not even once, saw a penny off of the use of their name, because there was nothing legally obligating Ray Kroc to it. And that's where it feels like, for as fascinating of a story as it is, I can't help but feel a bit conflicted about the person and the story and kind of and at the moment, at the time that I watched them, I remember feeling like kind of like, ugh, like I didn't know what to make of it. Because on the one hand, Ray Kroc had all of these desirable characteristics. Like, he had incredible vision. Like, he saw something that the founders of this restaurant couldn't even see themselves. And he had just like this relational savvy, right? He was just a salesperson. He would just connect with people, talk with them, like cast vision, get them to buy into whatever it was that he was trying to sell. And so he had this relational equity or ability to connect with people. He had brilliant strategy. Like he recognized, okay, I can go into this franchising approach. Okay, that's not as profitable for me as it needs to be. Let me get into the land holding business and lease the land back to the restaurant. And to this day, McDonald's is one of the largest landholders in the world, property owners in the world. They're still modeling this practice that Ray Kroc pioneered some 60 years plus ago. And of course, he had unrelenting determination, right? He would not settle. He would not take no for an answer. He was committed to this thing, even at his own personal cost, even when it cost him dearly between his marriage and his personal wealth. He was willing to press forward in this. But on the other hand, the guy wasn't so much of a great guy. I mean, he seemed, or at least he didn't seem like it. He used things like manipulation, leverage, deception, and control to build his empire. Like, it's kind of funny to me, but like this guy was like the original Hamburglar. Like for those of you like above the age of 30 when McDonald's used to have like these different characters, he is like the Hamburglar. And the crazy part is he didn't even care. I mean, part of the reason why the movie is so accurate and part of the reason why the movie is so spot on is because the details for the movie actually came from Ray Kroc's autobiography. He wrote about it in 1977 and he outlined it like these like bad faith deals that he had agreed to, his approach to the business. Like, so that's why the movie is so accurate, because it comes straight from his mouth and it just kind of like, that's the weird part. And I think that's what bothered me, is this sense of having no shame or having no regret for how you treated people or took advantage of them. And this feeling that there were no negative consequences. Like, yeah, you got divorced and you used personal money, but like you were in it for yourself anyway. And it just kind of feels like this thing that's like, I don't, like, that's not right. Something is unsettled there. Like, it bothers me. And maybe you're hearing this story for the first time and you're like, man, that's everything that's wrong with our country, or that's everything that's wrong with this world. And I would agree with you. And it's crazy to think that like Ray Kroc could be celebrated and regarded as, like this savvy business person. And it's kind of like all the negative stuff just kind of gets swept under the rug or kind of washed away. But at the same time, it still feels like we don't learn our lessons. It's like people still live like that today. People still operate like this today. And people are still rewarded for this today. I mean, think about it, right? McDonald's is a corporation, but think about other corporations who they make these promises about ethics and caring for the environment and treating things right, but then you find out or you hear about like how they have employees working in inhumane conditions or under extreme pressure, like countless hours a day to manufacture products and then put them in your hand or put them in your home. And it's not just corporations, there's politicians, right, who pledge to serve their constituents and to serve in the best interest of their country. But actually what you find out is that they're actually serving like those lobbyists or these lobby groups or like these large donors who are going to protect and insulate them and just make sure they hold their power, make sure they hold their office for decades or generations even to come. Or employers who speak of wanting to do right by their employees, right? Like how many times have you worked at a place where it's like, hey, we're a family here at such and such business. And yet what you realize, like they just want more and more from you. They demand more from you while giving you less compensation, less pay, less autonomy, less freedom, but more responsibility, more expectations, more, they want to take more from your family or more from your life. And in those places of work, it's not just the employers, right? It might be the colleagues who you're like, oh, these are my friends. But at a moment when they seem like, or when it seems like maybe they could kind of like throw some dirt on your name and throw some shade on you if it gives them the opportunity to receive recognition or maybe even a promotion, like they're quick to flip and turn and you're left kind of stunned of like, wait, I thought we were friends. I thought we were like in this together. And all of a sudden someone just kind of like turns on you and they get promoted or rewarded for it. Or maybe you've had this experience with real friends at school or in life where it's like, yeah, like they say they're there for you. They say they're going to be there for you through hard times. And the moment you turn your back or the moment you kind of look the other way, all of a sudden they're quick to gossip or belittle you to others or to other people in your friend group. And you're stunned. You're like, what in the world is going on here? Like, why is it that at every level, from corporations down to our personal friends, this kind of attitude or these kind of behaviors seem to be so prevalent and so prominent? And like whenever I see this kind of stuff, like, man, it just disgusts me. Like, it bothers me. It disturbs me. It's like it's become so normal, so prominent, so commonplace in our culture, in our society. And I'm head scratching thinking, like, why are these people continuing to have success? Like, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like Asaph in Psalm 73:16 when he wrote, I try to understand why the wicked prosper. But what a difficult task that is. Like, how many times have you asked and thought to yourself, like, God, why is it that these landlords or these corporations or these businesses or these people keep having success? Like, they seem like everything is fine and everything is going their way. And yet here I am, or the people who try to do good, or the people who try to go about doing good and doing things in the right way, like, they're just taken advantage of it and they're left to like suffer and deal with the consequences of these things. Like, can anyone else relate? Like, I know I feel that way. But can I be honest with you? Like really honest? Like, this doesn't just apply to those corporations or to my colleagues or a classmate or whatever. Like, if I'm really honest, like, this stuff applies to me. Like, when I speak of these things, I'm not just talking about someone else. I'm talking about myself. Because I know that I can be just as guilty of those things that I say disgust me and bother me as someone else. In fact, I would say that apart from Jesus, that's exactly what I would be. It's exactly who I would be. I mean, I can sit here and tell you about how a story like Ray Kroc's and the formation of McDonald's, like how that disturbs me to my core. But then I'll go and I will make similar type decisions that are selfish or self-serving or something that kind of feeds my ego. And I'll do things that run contrary to what I say I believe. I mean, I find myself at times tempted to cut corners, tempted to do something out of selfish motivation or selfish ambition. I'm tempted to take advantage of a situation if I feel like it's going to be advantageous or beneficial to me. I mean, I'll give you and I'm not even like talking about like major things. I'm talking about like down to like simple things. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Like, here in New York City, you know, when you go to a grocery store or Target or whatever it might be, and you go to buy like, or you go to like use a shopping bag to like put your items that you've purchased in that bag, you've got to pay for it. And usually it's like 5 or 10 cents. So you go through self-checkout and it's like, oh, did you use any like bags, or did you how many bags do you have? And part of me is always like, ah, screw it, like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I won't tell them, like, you know, kind of like, well, I don't need to pay for this, or like stick it to the system or whatever it is. And it's like, you know, I've got these 4 or 5 bags that I'm using, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And then I start thinking about, I'm like, Ricky, like, what are we talking about here? That's like 5 cents, 20 cents. Maybe I got 10 bags, 50 cents, and I'm willing to cut a corner. I'm willing to like compromise on something because I feel like that's the way it should be, or like that it's beneficial to me. Like, so like you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like these moments where it's like I can point the finger at everyone else, and here's the irony of it all. Like, here's what makes this so ironic. Is that when I think about all these wrongs and these injustices and these incongruencies that are displayed or evident like in other people's lives or in corporations or in politics or in our society or in our culture, like, man, I get fired up about it. Like, it bothers me when I see it somewhere else. But then when I see it in my own life, I get kind of hush about it. I kind of lay low about it. And that's how it goes, doesn't it? It's like it's easy to get riled up when we see problems or when we see injustices or when we see when we see these kind of things in someone else, but then we get really quiet when we see it in ourselves or when it's exposed or revealed in ourselves. And there's this kind of situation or this exact type of situation that takes place in the Gospels amongst Jesus' 12 disciples. And it was this kind of like crazy, somewhat funny set of circumstances that occur. And Jesus had to call it out, like, and said, no, something's got to be different. Something has to be changed in this. And this particular story unfolds in Mark chapter 10, and that's where we're going to be. And I want to kind of read through these verses, Mark 10, 35 through 45. But what I want to do is that as I read, I'm going to like stop and like teach and talk about some of these verses. Then I'll read another verse and I'll kind of talk and teach about it some more and kind of work our way through this passage. So Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45, and I'll begin reading in verse 35. And this is what it says. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do us a favor. Then Jesus responded, what is your request? Now pause right here for just a moment. So you have James and John, these two brothers. They come to Jesus and they say, hey, Jesus, we want you to do us a favor. Now imagine for a moment that you're walking in the presence of Jesus. You've walked with him. You've seen him do all sorts of incredible things. He's fed thousands of people with just a couple pieces of fish and a few pieces of bread. He's healed the lame, like people who were unable to walk. Like he says, hey, get up and pick up your mat. And they jump to their feet and they walk out the door. He's preached incredible messages to thousands of people. He's healed the blind. Someone who couldn't see is now able to see. You've traveled all around the countryside with him, seeing him do the literal impossible. Dead people have been brought back to life. People who have dealt with or suffered through prolonged illness have been completely healed. And so you are walking in the presence of a literal God, and you are with him, and you say, hey, Jesus, we want you to do us a favor. And rather than shoot you down, rather than say, mind your business, he responds and says, what do you want? What would your request be? I'm not sure if you know, I don't know what I would ask, but here's what they asked. Verse 37. It says, they replied, when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. Oh, brother. My goodness. I mean, could it get like any more like arrogant? Like, hey, Jesus, when you die and you return back to heaven and you're sitting on that glorious throne, can you save the seat on your left and the seat on your right so that we can sit next to you? Listen, man, if you go to a restaurant, they won't even seat you until your whole party shows up. And these guys are going to Jesus saying, hey, when you get to heaven, save our spots. Like, it's crazy. Jesus responds to them in verses 39 and 40. Verse 38. He says, you don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering that I must be baptized with? So again, like Jesus is trying to explain, like, hey, you don't even know what you're talking about, guys. You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what it's going to cost. You don't know what it's going to take from you to do what you are asking me to do. Now, mind you, right before this exchange, literally right before, Jesus explains to his 12 disciples that he is going to be betrayed, that the time has come for him to be betrayed by a friend, that he's going to be turned into his accusers, they're going to crucify him and kill him. On the heels of telling them, this is what's going to happen to me. Guys, I'm about to be betrayed. I am going to be crucified. I am going to be killed. I'm going to die. On the heels of that conversation, immediately after, these guys come and say, hey, Jesus, now that you've told us you're going to die, can we sit in those positions of honor? And Jesus is like, you don't even know what it's going to entail. You don't know. Can you walk through the suffering I'm about to walk through? The suffering I just explained to you? Do you even know what it's going to entail? Do you even know what I have to go through in order for God to glorify me and give me that throne? James and John, verse 38 or 39, reply, oh yes, we are able. Then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right hand or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. So Jesus kind of says something. They're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, oh, no, we are. We can go through that suffering. We can walk through it. And she's like, okay, bet. Okay, bet. Yeah, okay. So you are going to go through suffering. You are going to have to drink from this cup. You are going to pass through these things. But listen, regardless of what you go through, it's not up to me to decide who gets to sit on my right or my left. That's up to God above. And so that's none of my business. Now, mind you, this conversation is taking place amongst a group of friends. So this is how the others responded. Verse 41, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. Now, indignant by definition means feeling or showing anger because of something unjust or unworthy. So the 10 other guys are in this group and they hear these guys come to Jesus and say, hey, do this for us. Hey, position us in this way. Hey, save our seats. And they get fired up. They're upset about this. They're like, you're not worthy of that. Like, you're not qualified for that. That would be an injustice for Jesus to save those seats from you. All of us are in this together. We're traveling with Jesus. We're walking the same road. We're going to suffer just like you're going to suffer. What makes you better than us or more worthy of being put in that situation? So they're fired up and they're riled up about this, and Jesus, being ever aware of the tension and the relational dynamics, decides it's a key opportunity for him to speak into this. So he chimes in. Verse 42, Jesus called them together and he said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them." So he begins to kind of talk about this exact thing that we were just talking about a moment ago, where he starts to speak and says, listen, you know the rulers of this world lord it over their people, and they flaunt their authority. You know those injustices that get us upset, the Ray Krocs of the world, and the others like that, the leaders, the people, the friends, the co-workers, the individuals, the leaders, the politicians, whoever it might be, the people that upset us when they do things in a way that's working against the people that they're supposed to be caring about or serving or helping or benefiting. Those people, Jesus starts to speak of that. And listen, here's what I want you to know. This is some 2,000 plus years ago. Those same problems that exist today were prevalent and prominent in Jesus' day, and they were completely there. In any place you have humans operating on their own and apart from Christ, this is what you can expect to see. And so Jesus goes on in verse 43, he says, "But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else." You see, Jesus says, listen, among my followers, among my children, among my sons, among my daughters, it will be different. We shouldn't be like everyone else. We shouldn't act like everyone else. And the reason why is because he explained it in verse 45. He said, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, Jesus, the Lord of all, the Lord of the universe, God in the flesh, showed up, and rather than demanding people do exactly what he said the way he said it, he said, let me show you a better way. Let me model something different for you. And what Jesus was trying to do in this conversation was to help his friends see that there is a problem with being indignant and fired up about other people's actions while being unbothered about your own actions. See, Jesus was telling his disciples to take the focus off of the comments made by James and John and instead pivot and redirect their attention back to themselves. He turned the conversation from them to me. Stop worrying about them and look at yourself. Stop thinking about them and consider what's happening in your own life. See, what the brothers requested, what James and John had asked for, yeah, it was wrong. But Jesus wanted them to look at themselves and make inquiries and see if they were any different. That's why he said, among you, it will be different. Translation, or in other words, it's not different right now. You're the same as them. Your attitudes, your actions, your behaviors. But among you, it will be different. There will come a day, there will come a time where you will need to change, where you will be changed. And it should be different among you. You see, you can be upset with how others act, but if you want to change and if you want to be changed, and now I'm speaking to you, I'm not just speaking in the context of this passage or these disciples, I'm talking to you, everyone watching and everyone listening. If you want to change and if you want to be changed, then you need to be disturbed by what's happening in your own life. You need to be disturbed. And when we talk about these components of change and what it takes to be changed, it takes being disturbed. Like Jesus was saying in this text, listen, I'm glad you're disturbed by what James and John said. I'm glad you're bothered by what they asked. But what you should really be disturbed by are the things that are in your life that look exactly the same as theirs. And that's the problem, isn't it? You know, we say we're disgusted and bothered by the way things are in the lives of others or the way things are in the world and the way that people act. But then, in many respects, our lives look no different. In fact, there are cases or instances in which our lives look exactly the same. We can complain about corporations, we can complain about politicians, we can complain about employers, we can complain about our colleagues or strangers, but when we accept those same ideas, those same attitudes, those same actions and behaviors within ourselves and ignore it, we are no different than them. But to be disturbed, To be disturbed is to be so bothered by the cultural norm, to be so bothered by the status quo, that you're committed to eradicating it entirely within you and to crushing it and saying, I don't want this to be present or prevalent in any area of my life or in any part of my engagements. You see, listen, this may seem simple and obvious to you, but you cannot change the world if you are unwilling to change yourself. You cannot change the world if you are unwilling to change yourself. And this is where it gets tricky. It's so much easier to complain about everything else than it is to actually do the work of changing myself. And I think part of the reason why that's the case is because we're not bothered and we're not disturbed by the things within us. It's easy to read about James and John and to ask, how could they ask a question like that? Or to hear about a story like Ray Kroc and say, how could he do that to someone else? But just like James and John, we don't consider where those actions exist and have a stronghold in our own lives. And this is what sociologists will refer to or call the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error. And what the fundamental attribution error is simply this. When someone else does something wrong, or when something else goes wrong for someone else, it's easy to kind of validate it or justify by saying, well, yeah, they have bad intentions, or they're lazy, or they're incompetent, or whatever it might be, or they're greedy, or whatever. Right? You have a coworker who seems to be late all the time. They're like, oh, the trains or the traffic. And you're like, no, you're just lazy. You don't get up on time. You don't care about showing up early. But when you experience that, when you encounter, it's like, oh, my kids were sick, or there was so much traffic on the highway. There was so much, like the trains were running slow, and so I couldn't do that. And so then you just kind of like write it off or justify it. And someone else, it's negative, but for you, it's positive. Or for you, how you view yourself is positive. That is the fundamental attribution error. But rather than excusing our own behavior, we need to be disturbed by it. If you want to be changed, you need to become disturbed by it. Listen, again, I know this sounds obvious, but you will not and you cannot be changed if you continue to live the same. If you continue to allow those same things to exist and have a stronghold in your life. There is no like magic sprinkle dust that will all of a sudden change things. There is no one speaking change over your life and you not having to do anything about it. It's up to you, and get this, it starts with you. If you want to be changed, it begins with you. If you want to change and you want to be changed, then you're going to need to be disturbed by the attitudes, the actions, the behaviors that exist within you, not the ones that exist out there. It starts with you. So what I want to do for the rest of our time together is just provide you a checklist of sorts that you can use to assess different aspects of your life or different aspects of who you are, and to identify and see, are there things here that should disturb me? Are there things in my life that should bother me? And before you panic, let me just kind of clarify, like, this is by no means an exhaustive list. I know I just speak for myself. If I were to go through every area of my life or evaluate or assess or take inventory of all the areas of my life, like we would be here all day. Like we would be here for hours and hours on end. So I'm not trying to propose or offer an exhaustive list, but what I want to do is I want to highlight some of the specific areas that Jesus himself referenced in this passage. And then you can use that, and I can use that as a catalyst or a launching pad to consider other areas of our lives and make sure or identify or kind of like spotlight any areas of our lives that we should be disturbed by. And so let's begin in Mark 10:42. Where Jesus said this, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them." Now, I want to kind of highlight this first area, lord over others, or lording it over others. This is the first area of inventory, the first area of assessment. In a literal sense, this is about someone's kind of oppressive or tyrannical rule. Like to literally be a tyrant or oppress your people or oppress someone else. Now, hopefully for most of us, we would think like, whoa, shoot, okay, cool. Check that box. I'm good there. I'm not oppressing anyone else. I'm not a tyrant. So I'm good there. Thank God, okay? But what Jesus was really speaking at, it wasn't just the literal sense. What Jesus was really speaking about is anytime someone uses their rights to exalt themselves while diminishing others. To lord over others is to use your rights to exalt yourself while diminishing others. Now, we live in a world where this is so prevalent and so prominent, and now I'll reference one aspect of it that's so plainly obvious: cancel culture. Cancel culture, where someone does something wrong, someone commits a grievance, someone makes a mistake, someone commits some sort of offense, and the whole world, Twitter and social media and everywhere else, will shout and demand that that person be canceled. No one should support them. No one should, do anything for them. No one should, they should be fired. All these things, and it's just like immediate, boom, 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 like spitfire, and people just getting like kind of verbally and socially assaulted in many ways. And listen, I'm not here to justify or validate or vindicate anyone's actions, the offenses that they committed or the wrongs that they've committed. I'm not talking about those actions even. I'm talking about our reactions, where we start saying, well, no, this hurt me, or this offended me, or this bothered me, and so because of that, you no longer are worthy of whatever it was that you were doing previously, or whatever it was that whatever position it was that you sat in. And that culture, that example, or that's an example of lording over someone else. It's using your rights to exalt yourself while diminishing someone else. And you might say, well, Ricky, I've never tweeted anything. I've never posted on social media about anything like that. I've never really canceled anyone. So again, I think I'm okay. And I would say, yeah, good, don't do that, or don't react in that way. But here, let's kind of make it a little bit more personalized. Let's say someone does do something that harms you, or something that offends you, or something that bothers you, kind of in a personal level. And so you have this offense, you have this wound or this hurt. And maybe you've even tried to forgive, maybe you've even spoken forgiveness. But then anytime someone kind of like broaches or gets close to that, and it's like, oh no, this is gonna kind of reopen that wound, or kind of trigger that sensitivity. And so then you kind of leverage that and you start saying, no, I can't do that, or I'm I'm not gonna forgive, or I'm gonna hold it against them, or I'm gonna kind of guilt trip someone, like, oh, well, you don't know, one time this happened to me, and so now like this. And so you start kind of leveraging your rights and exalting, and elevating yourself. You see, whenever you leverage or weaponize your rights, you have a right to voice your opinion, you have a right to voice your freedom, you have a right to express how you feel. But whenever you leverage that or weaponize that to elevate yourself, while at the same time diminishing or devaluing or denouncing someone else, you are operating contrary to the ways of Jesus. So here's a simple way to consider this. Look back over the last 6 months of your life. Have you used any of your rights to exalt yourself, to elevate yourself, or to diminish someone else, or to denounce someone else? And if so, it should disturb you. But Jesus didn't just say that. Back in verse 42, he says, the rulers of this world lord it over their people. But then he says this, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. So it's not just about lording over others, it's about flaunting authority. Now, this is an interesting phrase, and it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is because throughout all of the scriptures, there's a lot of dialogue about authority. We're taught about the importance of submitting to authority, of being obedient to our authorities, both our spiritual authorities as well as the governing authorities in our lives. So authority itself is not the problem, nor is having authority the problem. But this particular construction in the Greek language and this phrasing, this is the only instance in which it's used. Well, this and Matthew 25, when Matthew records this exact same story. So only one time is this kind of construction of flaunting authority referenced or used in the scriptures. And it's as if Jesus, what I take it to mean is that Jesus wanted to make sure that everyone knew that it was crystal clear. He wanted to call out any instance in which someone would flash their authority or use their authority in a flashy or self-serving manner. Now, the truth is you don't have to be in a leadership role or have some formal or official title in order to flaunt your authority. You see, to flaunt your authority is kind of the equivalent. Like, remember when we were kids and you would say, no, I'm older, so I get to go first, or I'm taller, so I get to go first. That is the equivalent of flaunting authority. So hopefully you don't still do that now as an adult, like I'm taller, so I get to go first, or I'm older, so I get to go first. But here's how this plays out in adulthood. Do you know who I am? I'm so-and-so, or I'm super important, or I'm more senior than you at your place of work, or I'm more senior than you at your school. I've been here longer than you, so I know more than you. And when we say or when we think things like that, what we are communicating or what we are expressing, even if not out loud, is I'm better than you. And that is to flaunt one's authority. So again, I ask, look back over the last 6 months or over the past 12 months. Have you at any point flaunted your authority, if not out loud, in your heart or in your mind? Where you thought, maybe I'm better than that person who's asking for money or holding up a sign in need of help. I'm better than that coworker who was given that project, but if it was me, I would have crushed it. I would have nailed it, and yet it kind of feels good to see that they've struggled. Listen, I'll raise my hand and say I'm guilty of that. I've felt that way, or I've thought that way. And again, that runs contrary to the ways of Jesus. So we've talked about lording over others. We've talked about flaunting authority. But here is the third one, verses 43 and 44. Jesus speaks, "But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else." And here's the third area of inquiry: the desire to be served. The desire to be served. Now, a little over a year ago, for our 15th wedding anniversary, last summer, Chris and I did something we'd never done before. We went to an all-inclusive resort in the Dominican Republic, a resort called The Excellence. And we're not typically like all-inclusive type vacationers. We like to go explore. We like to go to different cities. We like to actually kind of like throw ourselves into the culture of a place rather than just kind of hanging out at a resort. But last year, what we needed and where we were at was like, hey, we just want to go somewhere where we don't have to think about anything. And let me tell you, like, it was incredible. It was amazing. Our hotel, we were right on the beach. We had a beautiful room, incredible swimming pools, access to everything all the time. And it was just like amazing. Like, I was astounded. I remember saying to Krista, because I'd never been someplace where like people were just so eager to serve you. It was like, hey, what do you need? We'd be hanging out by the beach and people come, can we get you French fries or hamburgers or pizza or food or drinks or cocktails? What do you want? What can we bring you? Towels, whatever it is that you need. You'd go to dinner, they had these different restaurants on the property, and you'd go to the dinners and they'd be like, our options tonight are this, option A, option B, option C for the main entrees. What would you like? And like, I'll take all three. And they're like, okay, we'll bring them to you. What else can we get you? It was just like crazy. Like, we had never experienced anything like that. It was incredible. And let's be honest, I think we all kind of like that feeling of being pampered. Like that feeling that like someone else is serving us. Someone else is taking care of our needs. Someone else are figuring out details for us. And now the problem isn't that we're being served when we pay for a service. The problem is when we expect to be served in the way that everyone else should bend and accommodate to our preferences, our desires, our biases, our intentions, or the way that we go about doing things. Again, this runs contrary to Jesus and the ways of Jesus. In fact, when you look at that text, when Jesus speaks about the word being a slave or being a servant, it's actually the same Greek word. It is the word doulos, D-O-U-L-O-S. And that Greek word literally means bondservant. Anytime you read in the New Testament, I'll give you a little bit of like insider information. Whenever you see the word servant in the New Testament or slave in the New Testament, it is the Greek word doulos. And doulos means a bondservant. Now, a bondservant is someone who willingly submits themselves to the owner because they recognize that life with the owner is better than life apart from the owner. But a bondservant or a doulos is also one without any ownership rights of their own. And so what Jesus was speaking to his disciples was that, hey, you are to be this way. You are to be enslaved. You are to be a servant to this thing. You don't have ownership rights in this situation. If you want to be first, you give up your rights. If you want to be the greatest, you forfeit your ownership. And this is so significant because it runs contrary to the pop culture, normal culture, society, whatever it is you want to use, where everyone thinks it should be all about me. Now let me tell you a personal story because this word has significant meaning for me and in my life. Because back in 2014, as things were crumbling and falling apart in my life, I made a decision that like I need to stop living for myself. I had made my life about me. I had operated and lived opposite of these things that Jesus talked about here in Mark chapter 10. And one of the decisions I made was that I was gonna go and I was gonna tattoo the word doulos right here across my left wrist. And this would serve as my permanent reminder that I'm giving up my rights, my ownership rights, and that I'm entrusting myself to Jesus and saying, Jesus, whatever you want me to do, that's what I'll do. I will serve. I will be a slave to you because my life with you, I need you to be changed. And my life with you is better than my life apart from you. I'm falling apart on my own and I need you. And so I committed at that moment that this is who I would become, that this is what I would desire. Because I was tired of seeing these things in my life. And listen, it's been almost 10 years since then, and I'm far from perfect. I'm a human being. I still give in to temptation at times. I still mess up. I'm not, doing things perfectly. But these things, when they're present in my life, I can say this with honesty, they disturb me, they bother me, and they drive me to change because I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be someone who lords my rights over others. I don't want to be someone who, flaunts my authority in given circumstances. And I don't want to be someone who feels like it needs to be all about me and that needs to be served and that like I need my preferences and my desires fulfilled and who cares about what everyone else thinks. You see, I want to be like Jesus. So it disturbs me when those things are in my life. And when I see them and I become aware of them, I pray and I submit them to the Holy Spirit and I say, help me change, help me be changed. That's what I desire. Now, I can't speak for you because I'm not sure what you desire, but I do want to ask you a question. What about you disturbs you? What about you disturbs you? Maybe it's something that was revealed or exposed over the course of the sermon. Maybe it's something we haven't touched on or an area of your life that we haven't discussed or didn't have the time or the margin to discuss. But what about you disturbs you? And are you committed to doing something about it? If you want to be changed, you need to be disturbed. So let me pray for you, church, as we step into a time of worship. Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for your guidance. Jesus, I thank you that when we're inclined to point the finger elsewhere, look elsewhere, or outside of ourselves, you remind us that it needs to start within. It starts with me. The change, being changed, starts when I'm disturbed about the things in me and decide I need to take action on them. I pray, Holy Spirit, for your conviction that it would lead to repentance and that it would lead to fruitfulness in our lives. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.